Alright everyone, now we need to talk about the DOJ. They are planning to appeal, actually, the decision by Judge Cannon to appoint a special master in the Trump Maralago raid case. You know, the FBI marches in, takes a bunch of things that clearly are not pertinent to the investigation. There's a reason why the DOJ intends to appeal this, and they're trying to go against that. And it is their right, legally speaking. They can file an appeal to basically anything that happens, so that's not anything bizarre or anything strange. What is the case here is that there's a reason why the DOJ would bother to do so. They don't want a third party with access to these documents, and it goes well beyond documents. They're sitting in a warehouse, I guess, somewhere, an unmarked location. What you're about to see is that this is going to be a dragged out process. They're going to, on both sides, they're both going to slow it down quite a bit. And you're going to get more leaks from the legacy media by people familiar with the case, by people close to the investigation, etc. In other words, Ed the janitor. Mostly through WAPO and Reuters and a few others, maybe AP, and much of it will be bullshit. I warned that this was the entire point of this raid. To be clear, we've pivoted from Espionage Act to Presidential Records Act, number one, and we've got number two, a large pile of material sitting around that has no pertinency to anything within the warrant that was initially issued. The warrant initially issued talked about classified materials under the Espionage Act. You've then seen a pivot to just the Presidential Records Act, so then you're talking about maybe unclassified material as well. They probably made that pivot because they realized that 95% of the stuff there wasn't even roughly classified. You've got empty folders are being considered pertinent to the investigation. And evidence of obstruction. Clearly, Donald Trump took the contents of those folders. They're still in the Mar-a-Lago somewhere. Oh my God, we need another raid. Or something like that. You've got Melania's clothing, you've got books, you've got news clippings, you've got Frame Time magazine covers. You've got things that quite clearly are not part of what originally was the investigation. Even though the Espionage Act is deliberately invoked within the warrant, it looks like as far as Joe Biden was concerned, when he stripped executive privilege possibly illegally over the documents, it was just he was talking to the National Archives. So it doesn't appear that anyone legitimately believes that Trump is selling nuclear secrets. We've got another TDS article on that we'll cover in our live stream today. It doesn't look like anyone was worried that he was selling secrets, that it was improperly stored because he took additional security precautions when asked to do so. He was fully cooperative for more than a year with National Archives, with the DOJ. It looks like a case of data retention. The National Archives want paperwork back. As far as the empty folders, I'm willing to believe 9 times out of 10 that Donald Trump simply was photocopying shit for his own personal records and that they were empty because they were being processed at the time. Whether or not those documents are in the loose documents in that hall remains to be seen. They could have been empty, by the way, to begin with. Maybe Trump just liked the stationery. He's into weird shit like that. I mean, just look at the rugs at the Mar-a-Lago. Just to be clear, maybe I'm not a fan. What they don't want is for a third party, an independent one, which may be a Trump derangement syndrome sufferer anyway, to go through these materials and deem that a large proportion of them are, number one, attorney-client protected. We've got an admission of that. We already know that. Number two, irrelevant to any investigation. I'm sure that Melania's bathrobe falls into that category. And to take these documents and repatriate them to Trump because they're not queried by the National Archives. Certainly the National Archives do not have the unilateral capability of taking the clothing of the President or the First Lady and putting them up in a closet in the National Archives. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Maybe Abe Lincoln's hat, but are you arguing that Melania's panties are pertinent to U.S. history? I'm sure they would love to make that case. Very, very interesting logic that they're using. They're opposing this because they're terrified of the fact that the United States public will very quickly realize that a large proportion of all of the documents there have nothing to do with the case, leaving them with a fairly bare-bones approach. They've got a small pile of potentially classified material. Then they have to wage a court battle because Donald Trump will say, look, I used executive privilege to declassify these materials. All I had to do was sit over the box and deem them declassified. Call it unethical, reckless, say that I'm a sleazebag or whatever. I declassified them. I'm allowed to have them. If the National Archive wants the original copies, that's not a crime that I kept them longer than that, and there was no need for an FBI raid. When the U.S. public learns of the lack of pertinence of much of the material taken, and you can see it yourself from the fucking inventory list, let alone the write-up about some of the materials in the filing before the court for a special master, which was granted on 3 of 4 principles, not without good reason. The idea that this judge was a Trump appointee, therefore this is corruption. Okay, yeah, and the judge that filed the original warrant is an Obama donor who represented Jeffrey Epstein. That's not corruption? No problem there. Not a glaring contradiction in terms. What I would say is that this was a rubber-stamped warrant. Trump probably got a tip that they were coming and threw a bunch of clearly unclassified material and non-pertinent materials into the same boxes, hoping they would just walk out with them, thus violating his attorney-client privilege, his executive privilege, and the proceedings of the warrant at the same time. He knew that it was going to happen. He trolled them. I wouldn't be surprised if you have a bunch of handwritten notes about Russiagate in those boxes as well. And when the special master looks through them, assuming that the appeal is rejected, and I suspect that it will, assuming that the special master gets access and looks at those documents, they're going to be chuckling half the time. And how long do you think it'll take for that special master to go through thousands and thousands of pages of material to determine what is or is not pertinent to the original warrant? It's going to take a long fucking time. Even if they work day and night, they're literally just working on caffeine fumes. It'll take weeks. Well, that puts you in October at the very least, so the idea of an indictment before the midterms, I think, is probably dead at this point. Just the appeal itself will take probably weeks. We'll see what happens. Link in the description to this story, by the way, archived, of course. I'm really loving this story because you see the tale of two realities beginning to form. If you are cerebral at all, if you're unbiased or pro-Trump, you see a persecution. If you got Trump derangement syndrome, all you see is Orange Man bad. He should go and they should put him before a military tribunal and lock him up in Leavenworth or something like that. Evidence be damned. They're actually standing by the FBI and the DOJ in the concept that an independent third party shouldn't be able to actually review the documentation. We got it from Marianne Williamson the other day getting badly ratioed when she said, oh, this is so terrible and so unfortunate that they're doing this. Yes, it's so terrible that due process would be afforded a U.S. citizen. Because Orange Man bad, right? It doesn't matter what he does. If he saves a bunch of orphans from a burning building, just runs in and single-handedly starts grabbing up little infants screaming through the flames and jumping through so all of his hair gets burned off, they would just have stories about how Trump looked ridiculous bald with scars on his head. They would. You know this. And to be clear, the entire deep state is acting in the same manner as that part of the general population. That's about all. Peace out.